I appreciate the opportunity to address you guys today, along with my colleague here, John Mysock. John and I have been working together in the body art space since 2014 or so. We got involved, well, John's been involved for a long time at the Association of Food and Drug Officials, and I started there in 2013 or 14, just working in the body art space, and specifically with the manufacturers and the regulated products segment. We started the body art committee at AFTO. And this presentation is about MoCRA and the impact on the tattoo and permanent makeup industries. And for, just in case you aren't aware, I assume everybody is, but MoCRA is a 2022 act that, it's the modernization of the Cosmetic Regulation Act. So basically brought all the cosmetic regulation, product regulation up to speed. And so that's where we're going to start. And we're going to talk about how the tattoo and permanent makeup industries are being affected by MoCRA, or will be affected in the future as well. So let's get started here. So the overview is simply, we're going to talk about the key definitions, and you guys know that the definitions are typically given in the regulations, and that's where we get all of these. We're also going to talk about some concepts, some main concepts. Section 2, we're going to talk about the MoCRA-related roles and responsibilities of tattoo and permanent makeup professionals. And I use the term roles and responsibilities rather than requirements because MoCRA is focused on the regulated products and not necessarily the practice of body art. So even though there are a number of things that the body artist in the shop can do to help to implement MoCRA throughout the industry, they're not necessarily required by the guidance. So then we got section 3, which is a summary of what we suspect the positive impacts will be, the challenges and risks of dealing with MoCRA implementation in the body art industries and the permanent makeup industries and what goes on in the shops. So first section, the key definitions and concepts. We're going to talk about the 7 elements of MoCRA. And the 7 elements of MoCRA, basically MoCRA is divided into 7 sections that are getting implemented by the responsible person, is the terms they use. Who the responsible person is and how that's defined in MoCRA. We're going to talk about what a cosmetic product is as it relates to tattoo ink and permanent makeup and how that's defined in MoCRA. We're going to talk about what a cosmetic product facility is, specifically for tattoo inks and permanent makeup manufacturing, and how that's defined in MoCRA. We're going to talk about the professionals and how professional is defined in the MoCRA regulation, specifically how it is defined in terms of tattoo and permanent makeup professionals. And then we want to give kind of an overview of understanding what MoCRA means for the tattoo and permanent makeup professionals in the shop and the studios. And then one of the main elements of MoCRA, what I would call the cornerstone of the entire MoCRA regulation, is the safety substantiation for the cosmetic product. And then finally, the adverse event and serious adverse event reporting and how that is impacting the operations in the shops. For MoCRA, there are 7 elements that the regulation is broken up into. This is all new for the cosmetic industry. It's pretty much standard for the drug, the medical device, dietary supplement industries, but for cosmetics, a lot of this has never been required. It's kind of been assumed that it's been getting done, but first and foremost, as I said, kind of the cornerstone of the entire MoCRA regulation is the safety substantiation, and that's the safety substantiation of the product and all the ingredients. And you have GMPs, and you have labeling. You're going to have records. They're now requiring registration, product listing, adverse event reporting. The FDA now has mandatory recall authority. And this is the compliance wheel that we have created to demonstrate how all of these work together to achieve MoCRA compliance and are interrelated. So any one of these elements not adequately addressed could impact the rest of the entire compliance wheel and how the operations are going. John, do you have anything you want to add on this?
If you think about it, the law doesn't state it, but it's basically the same thing that's required of drugs. In other words, it's a quality management system. And I think we might mention that a little bit later.
After the 7 primary elements of MoCRA, the definition of the responsible person as provided in MoCRA, the responsible person of a cosmetic product is defined in MoCRA as the manufacturer, packer, or distributor of a cosmetic product whose name appears on the label. The responsible person for the cosmetic product is responsible for compliance with MoCRA. Most of the time in the shops and the studios, the responsible person, and we're talking about products, is going to be the brand name on the label of the product that's being used. So it gets kind of confusing there because the actual terminology in MoCRA is responsible person, but it's not necessarily a person. It oftentimes can be an LLC or an INC. The thing to remember is it's usually the brand owner and their name appears on the label. And we're going to emphasize that tattoo and permanent makeup professionals should definitely identify who the responsible person is for their cosmetic products that they're using in their professional practice. So what's a cosmetic product? Well, according to MoCRA, the cosmetic product is a preparation of cosmetic ingredients with a qualitative and quantitatively set composition for use in a finished product. The definitions that are used here come straight from the FD&C Act. And so according to those definitions, and as has been interpreted by FDA for as long as I've been involved in this space, tattoo inks and permanent makeups are cosmetic products. A little bit further there, tattoo inks and permanent makeups, their basic formulation is that they are a color additive immersed in a carrier solution, right? So you have basically 2 or 3 constituents to tattoo inks and permanent makeups, and they're classified under FDA regulation as cosmetics with color additives. There's a big elephant in the room, and we don't get into it totally in this conversation, but color additives are required to be approved prior to marketing, and there are no color additives at this stage that have been approved for the use of injection, which is what tattoo inks and permanent makeups are considered to be applied as injections. So FDA has long since used a stance of enforcement discretion, meaning they could enforce the fact that there are unapproved color additives in these, so they haven't. That's one thing that we've been working on in the AFTO Body Art Committee, addressing the unapproved color additives. MoCRA requires that the responsible person ensure each U.S. distributed cosmetic product is manufactured in an FDA-registered facility, is listed with FDA, and has a documented safety substantiation, and then is labeled correctly. The cosmetic product facility is anywhere that a cosmetic that's being manufactured for market distribution in the U.S. is manufactured, processed, so on and so forth. That's how MoCRA defines a cosmetic product facility. Again, under MoCRA, cosmetic product facilities are required to be registered with the FDA, and the registration of the cosmetic product facility with FDA could be suspended. If a cosmetic product facility registration is suspended, the distribution of cosmetic products from that facility is no longer allowed. I'm sure you can understand the implications of that. Basically, the way that registration gets suspended is that there's a product that could cause harm or injury to a human, and if that's the case, if your documentation or records can't pinpoint that it's only associated with that product, meaning that it might be the entire facility that's impacted, your registration could be suspended, at which point you can no longer distribute cosmetic products from that facility. Okay, so we want to be sure to communicate that tattoo shops and permanent makeup studios don't fall under the definition of cosmetic product facility in MoCRA, okay? The practice of body art is not regulated by FDA. Mixing ink for use on the client is also considered the practice of body art. But if you mix ink and you place a label on it, or even if you don't place a label on it, but you're sending it out the door, meaning you're mixing and distributing ink, then that's considered a manufacturing process by FDA, and then you would be considered a cosmetic product facility, and FDA would regulate you as a manufacturer. So to be clear, most of the activities and operations at the shop and the permanent makeup studio are regulated by the state and local jurisdiction as the practice of body art. But does this mean that tattoo and permanent makeup professionals shouldn't concern themselves with MoCRA? The complete contrary is true, and that the professionals that are working in the studios and the shops play a critical role for the entire industry by assuring the safety and quality of the products that they use. And those products are what's regulated by MoCRA. So when we talk about professionals, the term professional in MoCRA is defined as the individual who's licensed by an official state authority to practice in the field of cosmetology, nail care, barbering, or aesthetics. And the term aesthetics is where tattoo artists and permanent makeup professionals fall in. I looked up the definition of aesthetics, and I'll bring your attention to, it states that aesthetics, something related to the pleasing appearance or effect. This is where the tattoo and permanent makeup artists are included, right? So they're involved in applying something that has to do with the aesthetics, appearance of, and that's how they fall into the cosmetic realm. Even though the FDA doesn't regulate professionals and the practice of body art, FDA does regulate the products that are used by the professionals in their practice. Then tattoo, ink, and permanent makeup products are no exception. We want to make it clear that the inks, pigments, and other supplies, not including things like lidocaine solution and OTC drugs that are often used in some of these application processes, that's a completely different situation that we can talk about. But the inks and the pigments used in the permanent makeup procedure or tattoo procedure, those are what's regulated under MoCRA. The tattoo and permanent makeup professionals, they're the primary links between the responsible person, the brand owner, manufacturer, distributor, labeler, packager, and the consumer in this case, right? The tattoo artist and the permanent makeup professional are the ones that play the critical role in ensuring that any of the information that needs to get back to the responsible person about quality of their products, they're the ones that play the critical role in this. So John, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, only that it's not unlike other adverse event situations, which we're going to talk here in a minute. But yeah, anybody can report an adverse event, and you can't, even if the manufacturer is required to report the adverse event. Getting information to FDA is our main goal.
So then we also want to identify, as I said, the safety substantiation as one of the 7 elements of MoCRA and the cornerstone, in our opinion, of the entire MoCRA regulation. We want to tell you what that is. So MoCRA requires that the responsible person maintain records that verify adequate substantiation of the safety of the products that they sell. Nobody wants to sell unsafe products, we get it, but now it's required that you have documentation on hand in case you get inspected, in case FDA comes and asks for it, or even just sends you an email and says, we need to have a look at the safety substantiation that tells us why you chose the acceptance criteria for your product. So what's adequate substantiation of safety? Well, that's defined also in MoCRA as tests, studies, research, analyses, or other evidence or information that's considered among experts qualified by scientific training and experience to evaluate the safety of cosmetic products and their ingredients, sufficient to support a reasonable certainty that a cosmetic product is safe. Basically, tests and studies and a lot of the stuff you can find on a good Google search about ingredients. I know John oftentimes mentions the CIR, the Cosmetic Ingredient Review. That's a good resource, but there's lots of publications these days and information available online for pretty much all the cosmetic ingredients. I know that chemists are coming up with new things daily also, but for the most part, cosmetic ingredients that are used in products these days, you can begin to assemble a safety substantiation dossier just by running a Google search. there's more to it, and we have put together a generalized or standardized type process for safety substantiation of cosmetic products. But for the sake of this talk, just understand that it's tests and research and analysis put together in a dossier that you may have to provide to an inspector of the facility. And again, this is for the responsible person. This isn't the artist or the permanent makeup professional. This is what's happening at the manufacturing site. Because FDA understands there could be proprietary information in a lot of this stuff, so MoCRA doesn't require that the responsible person share safety information with the public. And then a little bit of an application of this so that you understand kind of how this applies to what's going on in the shops and the products that are being used there. Some critical aspects of what we think would be involved in the cosmetic product safety substantiation for tattoo ink and permanent makeup. Well, number one on our list up there, I'll tell you why in a second, but micro safety, possible sterility and water source is where that comes into play. Chemical safety of the raw materials and the ingredients. Packaging safety, why did you choose the package that you chose, and studies about leachability, whether or not you're leaching anything into the product as it sits on the shelf or is prepared for the distribution. Supplier assessment, why are you using the suppliers that you're using? Do you have some kind of background materials, audit trails, things of that nature? Processing risks and hazards, it needs to be free from particulates. Heavy metal testing, shelf life stability, allergens, and then safety data needs to be batch specific. And these are the typical elements that you might want to find in a safety substantiation for tattoo ink and permanent makeup. Again, I stated that the micro safety is the most important. Those of you that have had your ear to the industry for some time, or what's going on obviously in the public health, that's you guys. And I'm sure over the last 15 or 20 years, you may have seen that there have been a number of inks recalled by FDA, and the typical reason that they state is something related to microbial contamination. So that's why we're saying that first and foremost, that's what we need to address. The other thing I'd point out is that the first guidance, even addressing any of the manufacturing processes that take place in the tattoo ink and permanent makeup manufacturing establishments, the first guidance was finalized here recently, and it's something that we had the opportunity to comment on in the AFNO organization. So it was finalized here October 2024, and if you'll notice, it literally says the primary thing that they're focused on is the risk of microbial contamination. So that's why we're saying is all of this stuff, we're trying to train the industry at a higher level of compliance, a higher level of safety. FDA's made it clear, they even, in this guidance, they even talk about recommendations for the industry, and most, if not all of their primary concerns right now have to do with microbial contamination of these products. One of the primary ways that all of this is affecting or impacting the public health is adverse event and serious adverse event reporting, right? This is not new for the industry. Complaints and things of that nature have been taken for some time. I know that the drug industry and the medical device industries have done this for a long time. So MoCRA defines an adverse event as a health-related event associated with the use of a cosmetic product that is adverse. In this context, we want you to be aware that an adverse event, that doesn't include a client saying, I don't like it, meaning I don't like the tattoo you did. That's not an adverse event. And then I included here the link to what is a serious adverse event, and it lists on the FDA's webpage. Basically, a good general rule of thumb is a serious adverse event is something that they had to seek medical attention for, but here it goes into specifics about death, life-threatening, hospitalization, disability or permanent damage, congenital anomaly or birth defect, or any intervention. If an intervention was required in order to keep any of these from happening, that's likely a serious adverse event. That's important because MoCRA dictates that there are requirements from the responsible person on timelines for how quickly you need to report a serious adverse event to the FDA, and the requirement is for the responsible person. What we're going to start discussing here through the next several slides will be how is it that the tattoo artist and the permanent makeup professional can help in that process of making sure that these reports of adverse events, serious adverse events, that information is communicated to the responsible person, so the responsible person can then fulfill the requirement of reporting it to the FDA. Section 2, MoCRA-related roles and responsibilities of tattoo and permanent makeup professionals. So related to the cosmetic product safety substantiation, we want to be clear that neither MoCRA nor the FDA requires the professionals in the shop to obtain or develop a safety substantiation. However, the professionals should identify who the responsible person for the cosmetic product is, and the artist should be keeping some kind of documentation about the inks that they use on each individual client. Some of the artists are already doing that and do that as best practice. Some artists aren't, in my experience. Professionals should ask for the safety substantiation documentation from either their distributor, the van that stops by to drop off supplies at their shop, or if they're ordering directly from the manufacturer responsible person. So the professionals here have the opportunity to not go outside of the acceptable or compliant supply chain, meaning they could order directly from the reputable manufacturer who's doing the right thing, and they could help them do the right thing by requesting with their order documentation of the cosmetic product safety substantiation. And of course, they could generally assess the adequacy, but there needs to be some training there and some education of the artists, the professionals, on what kind of information they would need to be looking for in order to adequately assess a safety substantiation, right? And so some of those elements would be what we discussed previously about microbial contamination, possibly microbial count testing. If there's any heavy metal testing, that would be something that'd be interesting. Leachabilities, shelf life testing, things of that nature. And is it batch specific, that kind of stuff. A little bit more of the cosmetic product safety substantiation, so what they could do in the shop to help support the implementation by the responsible person. Well, if I'm an artist and I ask from the distributor or the responsible person who I'm buying my ink from for a safety substantiation and they can't provide it, well, that to me is a red flag, and it might indicate that I need to choose a different supplier for my products. So a little guidance as a best practice, if I'm a professional in the shop, I would want to choose products that at the very bottom line, it'd be a verbal affirmation of a safety substantiation and a current listing with FDA. One of the favorite things of inspectors to say is that if it's not documented, it's a rumor. So verbal affirmation really doesn't do much. Batch specific certificate of analysis would be a little bit better. Then a completed safety substantiation and a copy available, that would be a lot better. And then best of all would be documentation with all the above, batch specific C of A, batch codes, best use by dates, and a current listing, proof of a current listing with FDA. All of that together and all of that documented would be the ideal supplier case scenario for me as an artist or a tattoo artist in the shop trying to decide where they're going to get their ink from. This also could take place with the distributors, right? If I'm a distributor and I'm distributing for a number of different responsible persons and driving a van through my district or jurisdiction and dropping off supplies at each individual shop, I might be asking the responsible person, the people that I'm buying this ink from or other materials, other cosmetic products, I might be asking them for this type of documentation and then keeping that for myself as well. So then we get to the roles and responsibilities of the tattoo artists and permanent makeup professionals related to the serious adverse event reporting. And again, we want to state up front that MoCRA nor FDA requires serious adverse event reporting by the tattoo artist or the permanent makeup professional. The state and local regulatory authorities often have requirements for that type of reporting that must be done by the shop or the licensed artist. We're going to recommend that the shops, the studios, the professionals, they should have an adverse event protocol so that they're not just making it up as they go along. This should be something that's standardized and sorted out ahead of time so they get an adverse event reported to them from their client and they can run through the process that's defined. So we suggest that these professionals report suspected, and again, this is product related, so if they suspect that it's a product related serious adverse event, we're recommending that the professional, the tattoo artist, report that to both the FDA and the responsible person as a best practice to promote health and to encourage the use of safe, high-quality products in their practice. And in my experience of working with the tattoo and permanent makeup industries for over a decade, if there is a problem, say the client goes home and comes back, or the client goes home and over the next several days they have an infection or a swell up or some other type of event take place, if they do say anything to anybody, typically in the decreasing order of likelihood, so who are they going to go to first? In my experience, it has been that they will most likely go directly to their tattoo or permanent makeup professional, first and foremost. That's who they would call and say, hey, I got a problem, or they'd go back to the shop and say, hey, I've got a problem. I've been told many times by tattoo artists, but also manufacturers, that a lot of the reasons that adverse events occur aren't necessarily ink related, but instead they are related to improper aftercare or not following aftercare procedures. For instance, going swimming after getting a tattoo or playing with your dog or any of that stuff, right? But if there's something that is suspected to be product related, oftentimes the consumer here is going to go back to the tattoo artist or the permanent makeup professional. After that, either recommended by the tattoo artist or of their own accord, the recipient of the artwork is going to go to a doctor, and then they may or may not go to the responsible person. They may not even know which ink was used on them, right? And then least likely I've found is that they're going to report this to any regulatory authority. Sometimes they may call the Department of Health, but I found that that's probably the least likely of all of these. And that's why we're saying that the critical or the linchpin in all of this is the tattoo artist or the permanent makeup professional, because in a scenario where there is an adverse event that could be product related, they're usually on the front lines. They're usually the ones that are going to get the information first.
I might add that outbreaks that have occurred in tattoo ink were discovered through MedWatch because of health departments reporting events that occurred in multiple states. Right? That's what linked it back to the manufacturer. So it's very important.
Yeah, and I would add that another one that might link it back to the manufacturer is if a client comes in and one part of a large tattoo is inflamed, and the artist can identify that, oh, well, in that one part, I only used this ink. But there still needs to be a lot of work done to help to decipher how to identify or how to help the artists and professionals start to understand and identify what could be cosmetic product related as an adverse event. In the meantime, I don't think it's a bad idea, and FDA will tell you over-reporting is not a bad thing. If it's suspected to be cosmetic product related, go ahead and report it. If the tattoo ink or permanent makeup professional is made aware, what we're recommending they should do is they should tell their shop or studio manager, then that entity should report it to the distributor. If there is a distributor, they should also report it to the responsible party or the name on the ink. And then they should also report it to the regulatory agent, state, local health department, right? And in this case, training of professionals in tracking and reporting adverse events would be very helpful. as well as being able to decipher between a serious and not serious adverse event. We need to still do some work on training of the professionals in these two areas, tracking the adverse events, how to document them in the studio, as well as what's the difference between serious and not serious in the tattoo art and permanent makeup realms. Just real quick, how do serious adverse events get to the FDA? Well, you have a consumer complaint or report, and in this case, the consumer could be a tattoo recipient, a permanent makeup client, the licensed tattoo artist or permanent makeup professional, or the shop or studio. Any of those could be the consumer, right? And what I want to illustrate is how the adverse events get to the FDA database. And in the database, that's where the data is collected, collated, analyzed, and things like outbreaks and other patterns can be quickly identified, right? So how does it get into the adverse event reporting system? Well, you have two primary routes, and both of them start with the voluntary reporting, which is why these individuals are so critical to this entire process. They need to understand that, yes, it's voluntary. They're not required by MoCRA to do it, but they're the critical aspect of the entire chain of events here to get the information back to FDA and to the responsible person. So you have two voluntary routes, and the first one is the consumer can report on the FDA website on MedWatch, right? And then after that, that goes directly into the adverse event reporting system. On the other side, you have a voluntary report that's made to the responsible person of the product. So that's the brand owner, right? And with the consumer, the tattoo artist would make a report to the brand owner, the packager, distributor, manufacturer. And as soon as the responsible person becomes aware, they're going to first identify whether or not it's serious or not and cosmetic product related. And once they've determined that it is cosmetic product related or could be, and that it's a serious adverse event, the time clock is ticking and they have a requirement to submit that information to FDA. And then that information goes into the adverse event reporting system. So John and I have done a lot of training and work here in the realm of supplier agreements, because a lot of these things are going to need to be implemented and required by industry, and industry working amongst themselves rather than expecting FDA to come in and require them. I could see that the local and state health departments might have some say-so as to whether or not supplier agreements are implemented. But point is, supplier agreements are not required by MoCRA, but we have found that they're very helpful in making sure that a lot of these things get addressed. And the agreement, it can't be vague. I draft agreements that have a table of responsibilities enumerated by the regulation number, and each entity that's involved, so you have the distributor and the artist, or the responsible person and the distributor, they both have a column, and in each column it's identified who's responsible for that regulatory requirement. As an aside, in the body art industry, the way that it is organized, a lot of this would be most effective as distributorship contracts, meaning the folks that drive around the vans to drop off body art supplies that work directly with the brand owners. A lot of the MoCRA implementation could be addressed by having supplier agreements implemented at that level between the distributor and the supplier. So, hey, I'm not going to distribute your product unless it has a cosmetic safety substantiation, unless I know that it's manufactured in a registered facility, so on and so forth. So stipulations of a supplier agreement that a distributor or Tattoo Inc. or Permanent Makeup Professional could implement. So is it manufactured in an FDA registered facility? Is it listed with the FDA? Is it accompanied by a batch-specific safety substantiation? And is it labeled with the information of the responsible person? And then finally, some of the positive impacts that we believe are taking shape and will take shape into the future. The responsible person, the Inc. brand owners, they now have the ability, once they've satisfied, they have a cosmetic product safety substantiation, well, they have the ability to market their product as safe. This is going to give enhanced consumer trust in the tattoo and permanent makeup industries. And one of the things I've run into a number of times with working in the body art realm is that a lot of the artists actually have spoken of kind of like a moral conundrum that they have and they have to deal with because they don't really know what they're putting in somebody else's body, right? And all of this stuff can help to address even that moral conundrum. Serious adverse event reporting may enhance the safety of tattoo inks and help to prevent outbreaks. Cosmetics went from being basically the least regulated to the most regulated of the FDA's regulatory responsibility. Ultimately, choosing a supplier will be a much more predictable process. And in this realm, you never want to have to rely on somebody's word for quality data and safety data and things of that nature. So professionals, they implement these types of steps. They won't have to just rely on somebody's word for the assurance of safety of the product. Compliance with MoCRA may help stabilize the supply chain, and then bad products may be removed from the supply chain quicker. John?
I hope you got some takeaways here about what your role can be in promoting this. You know, I know it's not your job, but I know you also get involved with adverse events and you probably don't like dealing with them. So the better job we do up front, the less time we're going to spend chasing things down.
So that brings into mind the challenges and risks. Some of the challenges is that there's going to be a potential for product recalls and accountability. So FDA inspections and enforcement, so for-cause inspections of a manufacturing facility, there's a challenge here because nobody wants to be unloyal to their manufacturer or to the brand that they get their ink from. And if the professionals start reporting suspected ink-related adverse events, well, inspection and enforcement could be one of the results of that. So that's a challenge. We're not trying to pit industry against itself, right? There could be a temporary or permanent loss of the specific supply chain. If a product is recalled, the professional will need to account for what's still in their possession and then either destroy it or return it, and they're going to have to document all of that. So there will need to be some work done to figure out how best to document that, right? I put together this slide because I wanted to kind of give an overview of what we're talking about here all in one slide, right? And the idea being is that if you've ever heard of the Swiss cheese model of quality, I work in the GMP space and there's the Swiss cheese model. The idea being that if you have a whole bunch of layers of protection or Swiss cheese and they all have holes in them but not necessarily in the same space, if you put enough layers on top of each other, well, then nothing can get through there, right? So here I am down in the corner asking, well, what could I do as a professional or tattoo artist or permanent makeup professional to help support the compliance to MoCRA in my industry? Well, as the model I've given you is basically, in this industry, you have brand owners on the far left, you have supplier distributors, and you have professionals. That's typically the way that the supply chain of this industry works, okay? And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to lower the number and get better control on adverse events and adverse event reporting, right? In MoCRA, the responsible person over here on the left is the manufacturer or brand owner. One of the major things that could help industry is the implementation of supplier agreements, okay? And the idea being, if the manufacturer brand owner on the left, the responsible person, it is now required to be compliant with MoCRA. Well, here are the 7 elements of MoCRA listed: safety substantiation, GMPs, labeling, records, registration, product listing, adverse event reporting, mandatory recall authority. Well, any supplier or distributor can support the compliance of these products in their industry by implementing a supplier agreement that requires a documented safety substantiation, a third-party GMP audit history, compliant product labeling, demonstration of record keeping, confirmation of registration listing with FDA, an adverse event reporting process, and traceability of the products, right? And then again, if there is an agreement implemented by the artist or the permanent makeup professional or tattoo shop, it's the same thing, just being required of possibly the distributor. And if the requirements are for the responsible person, each one of these layers can implement requirements in a supplier agreement to help the next entity up the chain comply with MoCRA. And the idea being, if we implement a supplier agreement on this layer, then we're going to close off that hole in the control of and mitigation of adverse events. Same deal here. We're going to close off that hole. And then the same thing here. And the idea being, if everybody is implementing supplier agreements to help support the compliance to MoCRA of the products that they're using, we're going to lower the number of adverse events. And again, I want to point out that primarily what's called distributorship contracts, this is the level that I think in this industry, these are going to be the most effective with the best outcomes. And that brings us to the end. So at this point in time, I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to address this audience. Real quick, I just want to add that if you're interested at all in working or doing some work in this space and learning more about all of the things that are going on, if you're familiar with the group AFTO, the Association of Food and Drug Officials, that is where John and we are working intently with the manufacturers and some Department of Health folks and some artists as well on addressing all of these gray areas and trying to bring this industry up to speed on all of the regulations. And it's a great place to work on all of these things. So if you are interested, don't hesitate to either reach out directly to John or I, because we're very involved in all of the body art committee at AFTO, or you could reach out directly to AFTO.
Right, and I think it's important to point out, you can be involved in the AFTO body art committee, but you don't have to become a member of AFTO. Okay, because I know that's a lot of money for some individuals, but if you got something to add, please get involved with AFTO.